I'm Elizabeth Diakos. I'm a career transition coach, and I help educators get out of teaching and into a life they love. And so part of the reason I do that is because when I was trying to leave my teaching job, I just really didn't know what I could do to leave and leave well, and I found it really stressful. So I've asked you to pop into the chat just where you're from and how long you've been teaching for. So I've got a few answers here already from some of the other members of the group. Thank you for joining us. And I know that for some of you, it's the end of a long work day, and I appreciate you coming here at this time when you could be doing all number of other things like having a glass of wine on the veranda or going to sleep or whatever. So yeah, I appreciate you being here. Can I just get people to mute as they join, please? Okay, so what I want to do, first of all, before we really get into it, I just want to ask you, and if you could pop into the chat, what's the biggest issue that you're facing in teaching right now? So I'll just give you a second to think about that and pop that into the chat. And welcome to the people who've just joined us. Can I just get you to pop into the chat how long you've been teaching for, where you're from, and what's your biggest challenge in education right now? Okay, so we've got not feeling valued, not having much autonomy, work-life balance. I think that's a really common one too. And so many people in the Get Out of Teaching Facebook group say that they don't have time for their own family. Yeah, being micromanaged, that's another big issue in education too. Thank you for your responses. I really appreciate you just engaging in this conversation. So what I want to try to do today is to bring you a fresh perspective. So I want to help you to see that there's hope, that there are possibilities for the future, and that it doesn't have to be a life sentence to be in education. So who am I? I was an art teacher in Melbourne for around about 8 years. I actually kind of bounced in and out towards the end and didn't really leave kind of neatly. I got out via the not-for-profit sector, and I did the Master of Applied Positive Psychology while I was on my way out. And then I followed that up with a graduate certificate in organisational coaching, and then became a career transition coach for educators. But it wasn't just a seamless exit. It took me a little while to work out who I needed to be working with and who I wanted to help and to serve. And so I guess I want to make your pathway out a little bit easier and smoother than what mine was. Yeah, so as I said, I'm hoping to bring a bit of a fresh perspective to the conversation and to help you to see that there might be some other possibilities. So, and yeah, thanks for everyone who's contributing to the chat. As you join us, if you could just show us how long you've been teaching for, where you're from, and what's your biggest challenge in education right now, that'd be great, just to contribute to that conversation. Thank you. Okay, so one of the things I think it's really important to be aware of as you're beginning to think about getting out is just have this really forensic awareness of your current situation. I think a lot of us, when we're in that space of feeling like undervalued and that you don't have autonomy, that everything you do is managed, you can't even choose what professional development you do, all of those things make it actually really hard to think creatively and to think expansively about what other options there might be for you. So I want to say to you that one of the things I really do believe is that education should be a creative space. And if we're able to be creative in that space, it actually goes a long way to giving a lot more job satisfaction. And yeah, thanks for all the people who are contributing. There's some real veterans in this workshop today. So thanks for joining in the conversation. Okay, so education should be a creative space. Teachers should be respected. I know that sort of sounds like it's stating the bleeding obvious, but I've seen so many times when that is not the case, and I certainly felt that myself. I remember one time I was an art teacher, so in the morning before school started, I would often just sit in the art room. It was all quiet. It was a beautiful, spacious room with light coming streaming in from the front of the school. And I just loved to just those first few minutes before the bell went, I was like, I can breathe. And I remember one day the boss came in, she's all excited and she's going, Elizabeth, we need you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm being seen. This is wonderful. I'm so glad to be here. It's great to feel valued and, in this school, and really, like I'm making a valuable contribution. You see me as a professional. And then she said, yeah, we really need you because you provide planning time for the other teachers. And I was just like, I just deflated, my heart shrank, and I just felt so undervalued, disrespected, worthless. It was just horrible. And the bell was about to go. So I had to kind of, put on the happy face for the students. And I just felt so defeated and deflated by that conversation, or one-sided conversation, because I don't think I really said very much at all. And so part of the reason why I do what I do now is because I don't want you to feel that way. Or if you felt that way in the past, I don't want you to feel like that anymore. So teachers should be respected. And then students should be physically and psychologically safe. And I'm sure that you've all experienced a time where there's a student in the classroom who's maybe violent or rude to another student or to you as a teacher, and it's really hard to create a psychologically safe space when these really challenging behaviours are being presented by the students and you're not necessarily in a good position or equipped to be able to deal with it. I know when I first started teaching, I had 5 of my own children, so I thought I was going to be great. How hard could it be? Just add in another 175 a week, because I had I taught prep art. I had 8 grades of preps, one after the other, like Groundhog Day it was. And yeah, it was pretty full on. And it took me the whole year just to learn their names, because they were all kind of about the same height. They all had their big hats on. It was really hard to just remember all the names. So I think one of the things I struggled with as a beginning teacher was actually creating a safe space for the students. But there were times when it was just impossible, and it wasn't my fault, and I needed more support than I got. And so I think that is something that even though that's not happening necessarily, or you might know that it isn't happening where you're working, I think that it should be happening. We should be able to keep us and our students physically and psychologically safe. I just wonder, maybe you could just share if you've got any stories or any incidents where you in the chat maybe that you might want to share with us, or times when you felt like that wasn't the case for you, where you didn't feel safe. And while we're sort of in this space about what's your current situation really like, I think the other thing is work should be constructive. So many times I saw situations where it was a destructive, context where I was undervalued, where the work that I did was undervalued and disrespected, where the things that the students created in the art room was disrespected and undervalued, or that there was this kind of pecking order in the school, and the arts were right down near the bottom. So I certainly experienced that myself, and I don't like it, and I don't think it should be the way things should be. So one of the things I want to try and encourage you to just be aware of is that when you're in a situation like that where you're disrespected, where you don't feel safe, where there's this a culture maybe in your school where you're not able to be creative, where you're not able to speak your mind, where you feel like you can't push back or even argue the point if they want you to, for instance, bump up a student's grades just so they can get through to the next level, those kinds of things, it gets really hard to trust yourself. And so one of the key things towards getting out is actually to have that courage and that faith in yourself and be able to face challenges. Now, it's hard, isn't it, when you're feeling like you're constantly under threat and there's this barrage of, information coming at you, training, and you've got to do data collecting, and there's all this stuff happening in the school and you're juggling 1,000 balls. How do you have faith in yourself, and how do you have the courage to step out when you're so overwhelmed? And I think that can really happen to a lot of teachers where they want to get out, but they're so overwhelmed and just swamped by the workload that the headspace that they need to think of a different life just seems so elusive. They can't even imagine how they're going to create that for themselves. And so I want to say to you, you need to have courage. You need to have faith in yourself. And if you can't do that for yourself, that's kind of why I'm here. I want to encourage you. I want to give you courage. I want to give you heart that you can get out if you want to, or that you can start to create a life that you don't need to escape from. That's a Seth Godin quote. One of my work colleagues sent me this little, one of those little poster things that said, instead of worrying about what you're going to do on the weekend, or instead of wondering about what you're going to do on the weekend, why don't you create a life you don't need to escape from? And I said to her, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I want to create a life I don't need to escape from. And she said, oh no, I've done it, haven't I? You're going to leave now. And I'm like, well, yep, because, you've kind of given me a glimpse of what the possibilities are, that I could actually have a life that I really love and not feel undervalued like this all the time. And I think when you've never done it before, if you've always been an employee and you've been in the one career for 20 or 30 years, it's really hard to contemplate. I've talked to teachers who haven't had to have a resume for the last 25 years. I haven't been to a job interview for the last 25 years. I can see some nodding going on there. So if you're in that situation, it's really hard to think about, how am I going to get out now when I feel like I don't have the skills and I don't have the experience, and I'm up against a whole lot of younger people who are going to be competing with me. How do I actually create a sort of a space for myself so that I can leave and leave well? And that's really what I really missed, I think, when I left, that I didn't leave well, that it was this awkward sort of limping out like a wounded animal. And I sort of left and came back and left and came back, and it wasn't a seamless thing. So I think if we can actually work on a plan, that can be really helpful, because if you've got a plan in place and you've actually got steps to take, then when you do decide to leave, you're ready and you're well prepared to leave. Okay, so one of the things that you need to do is actually start taking some action, because action builds confidence. And so there are some things you can do. So for instance, start to build your capacity so that you can take the first steps. And that might be things like building stamina. And I mean like physical stamina. So actually, I was so exhausted when I would come home from work. Especially the first couple of years, I would like go and have a nana nap when I got home from work. And then, of course, then no one cooked dinner and everything got pushed back and it was a bit of a nightmare at home. But I was just so wrecked, so exhausted. So one of the things that I've started doing now that I'm out is actually going for long walks and building my physical stamina. So that's something you can do. Just start doing the little things that are beginning to create the kind of life that you want to live when you're out. And one of those things for me was to be physically fit and healthy. So that's what I'm, started working on now. Can I just tell you that I didn't really do it very much when I was teaching, because like I said, I was wrecked and I was exhausted. And usually what I would do is go home on the way home and buy groceries or takeaway or whatever, and then come home and sort of, shove food at my children, make them go and do their homework and then collapse in a heap. So I wasn't really planning the exit. It was just kind of like I just had to get through the day. But if you can begin to plan it and build that stamina, that can be really helpful when the time comes where you are kind of ready to leave. And also create a schedule. So I have this timetable now for my days. It looks like a patchwork quilt. It's got all the little sections in there, and you know, all the different things that I do. So I've marked out the gym. I mark out travel time, if not that I've been going very far afield lately, but you know, anything I've got on, it's in my diary now. And that way I can see today I'm working on a book, today I'm doing, you know, I'm running a webinar, whatever, and I can see all the different things that I'm doing. If you're going to plan to get out, you might want to set aside a couple of weeks from a couple of hours a week from now, just to work on your LinkedIn profile, or to start updating your resume, or to start doing some research about the kinds of jobs that you might be interested in. So you don't have to kind of do it all at once. You can just start working on it. But we're serial doers. We're much better at doing things in series than we are doing them at the same time, like that multitasking myth. It's very hard to switch focus, and you lose time and you lose that momentum when you're switching focus. But if you say Saturday mornings from 7 till 8, or, you know, I don't know, whenever that suits you. Like when I was doing my master's, I would get up at 5 a.m. And one of my kids had just moved out of home, so there was actually a spare bedroom, which was bliss. So I had a little desk set up in there, and I would just go and do about an hour and a half of work before my father-in-law was living with us, and I'd hear him shuffle out in his slippers and turn the kettle on, and I'm like, okay, that's it, I'm done now. I can't, there's too much, it's going to be too much noise for me to focus. But from 5 till 6:30, I was totally focused, and I loved it so much because I was so productive in that time. I wrote all my assignments. I wrote all these poems. That was partly procrastinating, but it was so much fun to actually set aside the time for myself. And if you know you've got a purpose, it's so much easier to be able to convince yourself to do that when you're tired, when you know you've got other stuff that you need to get done. But if you say, you know what, my purpose here is to prepare myself to leave well, then it's much easier to set aside that time. Okay, so next thing we need to think about, and one of the big issues for a lot of teachers when they're planning their exit, is money. And I know, I'm sure that you'll all resonate with that. So one of the things that you do need is a buffer if you can. And ideally, it should be 3 to 6 months of what you need to live off. Now, of course, not everyone's going to be in a position to be able to do that, but that would be ideal. It just gives you a bit of space. It allows you to take a rest after you've finished, and it allows you a bit of sort of, I don't know, like gear shifting time before you need to start worrying about earning money again. Now, plenty of teachers leave on a whim and then don't have that backup, or they don't have that buffer, and they're in trouble. And so they go back to teaching. And I see that happen time and time again. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's good just to have a rest, find a new context, and try again. Not everyone's ready or feels like they don't have more to give to the profession. But if you're certain that you want to leave, then having that buffer of 3 to 6 months income is really important. And then the other thing, and ideally if you've got both, even better, is backup. So I was lucky. I had a husband, and he was so sick of me moaning about everything that he just, one night I went to him and I said, look, I actually, on my way out, I worked for Teach for Australia, which was a 5-month contract, and they're a not-for-profit organisation. So the pay wasn't amazing, but it was pretty good. It was okay. But it was a 5-month contract, and it was about to end. And I said to him, even if I don't get a renewal of the contract, I still don't want to go back to the school. And he said, oh, okay, fine. And just, stop moaning about it. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, great. So I literally got my laptop out, Googled how to write a resignation letter, and I wrote it then and there. I printed it out, and the next morning because I had to drive out like long distances to go and visit schools, I dropped it off at the school to the principal at 7 o'clock in the morning. Like, here you go. Here's my resignation letter. So yeah, that was a really good feeling. Anyway, so having that backup and that support made a big difference to me. And I know that, again, not everyone's in that situation, and that makes it more challenging. but start being your own backup. How are you going to create a space for yourself? And I'm not sure where everyone's from. It looks like we've mostly got Aussies here, but I know that there's, in the States, some people sort of sequester some of their income for 4 out of 5 years they work, and in the 5th year they take the year off, and they've saved enough money to support themselves in the 5th year, or 3/4, which is, you know, a similar kind of idea, but just a break every 4 years. And I think if I'd done that, I might have been able to stay longer, but I just didn't even know that was a thing. So, and teaching was really my first kind of career. So I'd had other little jobs, but this was my first proper career. And so I really needed a career mentor. That would have been good. I probably could have stayed longer if I'd had that. And yeah, so someone's just said they use their Google. Teresa, you use your Google Calendar. I love my Google Calendar. That's my patchwork quilt. All right, so we need buffer, we need backup, and then you need to know your bottom line. And sometimes what that means is you need to know, how much money do I actually need to live off every week? And not just every week, but there'll be some months in the year where you've got, like, I know I've got my car rego and the insurance in October. And so I need to set aside, you know, a couple of $1,000s to cover that. So knowing that that's coming in that month, I need more than I would in other months. And I'm sure you've all got similar kind of situations. So make sure that you've got enough money for each month for those big expenses. And then what do you need every week to get by, to feed yourself, to clothe yourself, to, you know, do all the things? And bear in mind that just getting to work can take up to 25% of your income. And by that, I mean, you've got to go to the hairdresser. We can't go to the hairdresser right now, but if we could, you've got to go to the hairdresser. You've got to buy clothes. You've got to have reasonable shoes. You've got to have a car to get to work, maybe, or pay for public transport, however you get to work. So there are expenses associated with actually getting to work and being in the workplace and having just the equipment that you need. So, and kind of presenting a professional persona. So knowing that, you actually don't need as much if you're not working. So that's actually a bit of a bonus, right? When you stop working, you actually don't spend as much money. And also maybe you've got more time to cook or to go and buy healthy food rather than buying takeaway in a mad scramble on the way home while you're, you know, sort of rushing to do all the other things. So just bear in mind that some of the expenses that you've currently got are just associated with being in the workplace. And if you're going to change jobs, obviously they'll still be there, but maybe there might be different expenses depending on what you choose to do next. And then I think the other thing that a lot of teachers are really, really concerned about, apart from money, is their transferable skills. And this is something that I think we really do need to give a lot of attention to, because teachers are actually amazing. Like, you've got communication skills and you can communicate with all kinds of stakeholders. So you've got your, you know, you might be communicating with your other teachers, your colleagues, your students, the principal, or the, you know, the principal class in your school. And then you might have other people too, like people who come in from outside to run workshops or training days or those kinds of things. And you've also got possibly the media who you have to tell about events that you're running in the school. So all these people you're communicating with, that is an amazing skill set to be able to go from one to the other and be appropriate. And that is a really, like, for a lot of teachers don't see the value in that, but in other contexts, that is a really valuable skill set to be able to switch gears like that. So just bear in mind that your skills are much more than you think you have. So you've also got organization. You've got to be able to see the big picture. What's my week going to look like? What's my year going to look like? How I can create a scope and sequence for a subject area across 3 or 4 year levels. And I can teach a lesson on one particular day that is kind of fits into that. So that is a huge, you know, capacity to be able to organize at that macro and the micro level. The other thing is project management. A lot of teachers don't realize that actually every time you organize something in your school, that's a project. So I used to run staff drinks on a Friday night. We would have to go and buy the food, get the drinks at a bargain price if we could, bring it all back to school, put it in the fridge. We had a little, money cup thing for people if they wanted to buy a cold drink during the week that wasn't alcoholic. We only did drinks on Friday nights. And, so there was all this stuff that needed to be organized. And then we had to, put the food out on the night and the drinks and everything, and then collect the money that people were paid to have that, and then put it all away at the end. That's a project, right? It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And every week it was like a mini project, but the project for the year was to run staff drinks. And we actually used the money that we raised after the first year. We were raising about a couple of $100 a year just from doing that. And we donated that to a water project in a third world country, so they could buy or build a well, so they got to have a drink as well. So like all of that was just like for funsies on the side. It wasn't even my actual job. But you can see the kind of capacity that you have to be able to pull that off and still do your actual job. Okay, so this is the stuff that teachers can do. And if you're interested, I actually cover a lot of this stuff in this season's episodes of the Get Out of Teaching podcast. So in season 1, I did, it was stories of teachers who left the profession, and mainly season 2 is that as well. Season 3, I do coaching calls where it's like a fly on the wall coaching call. I do one about where someone's done a transferable skills assessment with me, and then they come onto the call and we unpack that. I do a triage call example, and a couple of other, I've got 10 coaching calls of all different kinds in that. And the triage call, actually, which is just a 10-minute call to kind of work out where you're at, that person, I'd never met them before, and they agreed to be recorded, which was extremely generous of them. So if you want to have a little fly on the wall experience, that's season 3. But this season, I've been interviewing all kinds of professionals who help teachers or help people get out of their change jobs. So resume experts, LinkedIn experts, career coaches of all different kinds and ilks, and people with, kind of the hippy dippy end of the spectrum right down to the really full on corporate end of the spectrum. Where are my previous seasons? Yeah. So Apple Podcast has the audio version, and they're on, all the podcast sort of platforms. But it is on YouTube as well. It's just called Get Out of Teaching. So, but it's actually pretty boring on YouTube, I have to say. Like, even though I made it myself, it's just talking heads. So I listen to it myself, kind of as a quality control, but I take it walking. So I listen to heaps of podcasts now out since I've started walking a lot. And yeah, I just listen to my own podcast as well because it pops up on a Wednesday morning. It goes to air at 5 a.m. That's all pre-scheduled. I don't have to actually get up at 5 a.m. to do it. And yeah, so if you want to have a listen to that, this season is awesome, if I may say so myself, because there's a whole lot of information in there that is really valuable to someone who's thinking about leaving. And I also interview Chris Carlin and his partner from Master Your Money Now, and they're talking about putting a plan in place for retirement which was last week's episode. So have a listen. I think it's a great free resource. And if you don't do anything else, go away and at least have a listen to the podcast. Okay. So the next thing I think that we all get sort of anxious about when we're thinking about leaving is the resume. So what do you need on your resume? This is such a huge question. I think you need to think about focusing on the skill set rather than the context. And this is the same with your LinkedIn profile. So for instance, on your LinkedIn profile, say you're thinking of becoming a chef or a baker or something in that sort of hospitality food making. So you might talk about on your LinkedIn profile all the foodie stuff that you do. And then at the bottom of that, say, And when I'm not doing that, I teach, grade 6 at blah, 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 primary school, so you're framing the experience of the reader who's reading your profile in a way that shows off the skills that you want to put forward. And you're not focusing on the actual job that you're doing now, because you don't want to be doing that job anymore. So you need to push it over to go, this is who I am. I'm a chef, I'm a baker, I create these amazing things. I've done these short courses or whatever. And when I'm not doing that, I'm a teacher. And so you don't have to lie. You just have to switch the focus so that the focus is on the thing that you actually want to be doing rather than the thing that you are doing every day. Okay. And then if you think about, like, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the work of John Hattie, and he talks about, what I'm looking for and we are learning to, and the context. So it's the, what do you call it? The learning intention. So today we are learning to do whatever. So when I was teaching art, I would say I was going to make a coil pot with my students. So I would say, we are learning to roll an even coil. We're learning joining techniques. We're learning to keep the clay even and smooth and all these different elements of what you need to do to create a nice coil pot. But we're doing it in the context of making a coil pot. I could also use those same techniques to make a jug or a vase or a monster, where I have to join the coils and create hair or eyebrows or whatever. So all of those aspects of what I'm actually getting the students to do, those skills can be applied to different contexts. Now, you're all teachers. I know you get this, but I just want to say you can now do this with your own resume or your LinkedIn profile. What are the skills that you use in the classroom that can now be applied in a different context? And when you're writing your resume and writing your LinkedIn profile, focus on the skills rather than the context, because everybody thinks they know what it is to be in the classroom, and they think they know what a teacher does, unless they're actually a teacher, and then they know what a huge job it is. So if you're, just imagine yourself as someone just coming to read your profile, and they see, oh, Elizabeth can make coil pots. They think that's all I can do. But if I say, no, I can do all these different things, and these are the contexts that I might be able to do them in, it gives them a much better picture of what you're capable of. Now, you might not know where else you could do those things. So that's okay. Just try to leave teaching out of it. Don't talk about school. Don't talk about the classroom. Talk about, in general terms, an education setting rather than, the grade 6 classroom. Sorry, I'm getting passionate here. I'm going to lose my voice. Are there any questions about that? Because I feel like that's a huge, I wish someone had said that to me, 5 years ago. Not that LinkedIn was a thing really back then, but I wish someone had said to me, if you want to get out, you've got to really dig down and look at what are your skills and what are you bringing and how do they apply elsewhere. Nobody really said that to me, and I was struggling to find help. So have you got any questions around that in the chat while we're kind of going on that topic? Because I feel like that's something that maybe not everyone's had a chance to really think about. How are they going to reframe things so that it is actually something that people will look at and go, oh, okay, so I can see the value you might bring to this context. Would you list just the skills? Great question. I think you need to be a bit more specific expansive than that. So say you're very organized, give some examples of what you can do, which might mean, preparing projects to a deadline, the real thing might have been you ran an excursion and you had to get all the kids on the bus, right? But don't say that. What's the skill with that? It's getting everything ready so that it runs smoothly and everyone's safe. So but the bottom line is there's a deadline and you met it. So talk about that. With the getting everyone safe thing, talk about occupational health and safety and how you were compliant. Don't mention the kids tripping up the bus step or whatever. You don't need to say that stuff. It's occupational health and safety compliance requirements were met. Okay. And then talk about the outcomes. If you're applying for a teaching job, it's totally appropriate to put that stuff in there. You know, we did this was the context, this was the outcome, and this was the result, like that the students were happy and we had a great day or whatever, or their learning outcomes improved. But if you're trying to get out of teaching, everybody thinks they know what it is. So you just got to keep reminding yourself that they think they know what it is to be a teacher, and they think there's no skill involved because they've all been a student, and they just think, oh, I know what school is, I know what it takes, but they don't. So you need to focus on the skill set and leave the context out of the equation. All right. And I can see Teresa nodding frantically there. So thank you for that feedback, because I'm like, is this resonating with anyone? I've got a lot of blank screens here to look at, a lot of just names with no faces. So it makes it a bit hard. Okay. So I guess the other, oh, hello. Hi, Liz. Thanks for waving. And so are there any other questions about that before I move on to the next point? Okay, we'll keep going. So referees, and this is, I've got so much to say about this. When I don't know who's on this call, so I'm just going to say it anyway. When I was trying to leave, my boss was a bit of a wild card, and it was hard to know what she might say. So it was tricky to ask her to be a referee for me. And that's partly why I left via the not-for-profit sector, because they weren't as fussed about where my referees came from. And also they valued highly what I brought to the table as well. So there were two elements to that. The pay wasn't great, but there were other benefits, which was feeling valued and appreciated, and also just not having to get my boss to be a referee. And to give you an example, where she was at school speaking on the loudspeaker at the end of the day, this is after I'd left, and actually had a stroke, and no one realized because they just thought she was a bit off that day. Like, she just said strange things sometimes. And so I was worried that if she was my referee, that might not be a good thing. So I was keen to try and get out without her help. And I was able to do that via the not-for-profit sector. And then, of course, then I had someone else to be my referee. So then that was fine. But most school jobs will insist that they get your principal, and they'll call them anyway. So it doesn't matter if you put them on the list, they're going to ring them anyway. So you might as well put them there and give them a heads up. Sorry, I just can see that my internet's unstable. I'm just going to jump in and use my phone as a hotspot. So just bear with me for a second. Can I do that? Can I just get a wave if you can still hear me at the moment? Or am I frozen? Oh, I've got a wave. Yay. All right. I'm going to try the phone as hotspot thing and see if that works. Okay, we're back. All right. So another thing is, when you're going to leave, or if you decide to leave, make sure you actually prepare to leave, and don't assume that when you give notice that they're all going to be friendly about it and let you work out the time. One of the times I left, they said, oh, just go tomorrow. Like, I'm like, I beg your pardon. And that's happened to my daughter, worked in early childhood, or still works in early childhood, and she left a position recently, and they waited till the end of her shift. They called her and said, don't come back tomorrow. And she was devastated. She hadn't said goodbye to the family. She hadn't said goodbye to her colleagues. She had presents for everybody, and they wouldn't let her go back. So just bear in mind, clean out your stuff off your computer. Get all the passwords off there. It actually took me about 2 years to get everything off my computer, because when I started teaching, I hadn't had a computer before that. And so everything I had was on there. All my passwords to every little thing in my whole life was on that computer. And so it's really important. I'm sure you're all more sensible than that, but at the time that was like a new thing for me. And I was just, everything was on my Edgemail password at the time. And so, yeah, just make sure that you get all that stuff off. Collect all your personal belongings in case it gets nasty before you resign, or start like getting it out of the school or doing whatever you're going to do with it. Return any company property or any stuff that belongs to the school. And if you've got benefits or time that you've earned, time in lieu, whatever, find out how that's going to be paid out. Sometimes that can be awkward because that gives them a heads up that you're going to leave. So you're going to have to come up with a creative way to find out that information. But it's really important that you know. And if you're sick and you're overwhelmed and stressed, it's actually okay. I give you my permission to take sick leave before you actually leave, because sometimes just having a rest and just, recuperating gives you enough of headspace to get a bit of a clearer picture of what's actually going on. And maybe you don't need to leave, or maybe you can just leave a bit better. And so I really encourage you. I wish I'd done it. I didn't take any sick leave, and I didn't go and get the help from the, I forgot what it's called, the psychologist that the school provides. They give you a certain number of sessions with a psychologist if you need help. I should have done that. I'm pretty certain it is confidential, but I, at the time, wasn't sure. And when you're in that space where you're feeling really stressed and anxious, that is hard to go, oh, what's the reality here? I don't really know. And who can I ask? Because as soon as I out myself as being, not able to cope, I make myself vulnerable. Like, it's a minefield, right? So I'm saying to you, take some days off, just clear your head, rest a little bit, and then go back into the fray, and start thinking about your exit strategy. If you're sweating and crying and shaking, if you're sweating and crying on the way to work, or if you're, I read about someone in the Facebook group said she was sitting on her hands to stop them from shaking. If that's you, take some sick leave. It's okay. Like, that's what it's there for. It's there for your mental and your physical health. And it's really important that you use it if it's available. If you're stressed and you're overwhelmed, just take it. No one is going to thank you for leaving it. And you won't get paid out, or at least not in Australia, you don't. So you might as well take it and go and seek some medical attention and get some help and start living the life that you want to live. And I assume for everyone on in this conversation today, the life you want to live is a life where you're healthy and well. And if you're in that position, then you're not healthy and well. So go take some sick leave and just go and see a doctor and look after yourself, and start actually taking the kinds of actions that people who are well and healthy and sensible actually take. Start practicing from now. All right, enough of the sermon, sorry. And in the weeks leading up to your departure, if you've got a role in the school that you do that maybe nobody else knows how that operates, actually it'd be really helpful to create a process document for a couple of reasons. It's great for your resume later on if you need to explain some of the work that you've done, but also it'll help the next person who takes over from you. I'm sure I left an amazing half-finished art project that I'm pretty sure nobody would have taken on when I left, because it was a bit ambitious. And I feel so sad about it, but that's the way it goes, right? But if I'd had a process document that they could have followed to finish making it, maybe they would have. And then the other thing is, make sure you also have contact information for your colleagues that you want to stay in touch with, because some organizations will escort you to your office or to wherever your stuff is, to box up your personal items, and they'll cut off your computer access as soon as you tell them that you're leaving. So do all that before you leave, and back up your computer as well, so that you've got that, because some of that intellectual property that's on your computer might not be the school's, it might be your own stuff. So back up everything before you tell them you're leaving, so they can't sort of take all that. one of my daughter's colleagues is also quitting that same place, and they cut her off. They use this app or this platform called Story Park that they use to communicate with the parents. They cut her off that, and then they just fed the parents information about what was going on without consulting her about what she wanted them to be told, and it was just awful. So in that situation, you want to make sure that you're telling the story, you're the narrator of the story, and you get to say what needs to be said to whoever needs to hear it. Okay. And then the next thing is to lead a big life. And this is an idea of Brene Brown's, where she talks about leading a life of boundaries, integrity, and generosity. So, excuse me, the boundaries are, you start to create boundaries around your time and the things that you're prepared to do for the job. And in some cases, that might mean things like, I'm not going to go to the after school twilight picnic. Or I remember when in my first year of teaching, the grade 6 graduation, which was this extravaganza that went on until like 10 o'clock at night. And everybody seemed to go, but I didn't actually know any of them. And I was only teaching the preppies, so I didn't even know the grade 6s at all. And some of the teachers obviously had known them since they were really little, but I didn't. And so I just went and helped usher, and then I left. And they were like, "What are you doing? Are you leaving?" And I'm like, "Well, I said I would usher, and I've done that. So now I'm going home to my family." And they're like, "Oh, wow." Now, that was rare for me to actually do that, but to set those boundaries. But that's really important. And also set some boundaries around what you're prepared to do. And I mean things like, are they asking you to falsify information about your students and that kind of thing? Because that's really stressful. If that goes against your integrity and your, what you believe to be right and fair, then that can get really stressful. So setting some boundaries around how far you're prepared to go with that, or at least think about it, have an idea in your mind of how you're going to handle that situation. It's a good step towards, being able to cope better with the whole situation. The integrity part is holding on to that. And then the generosity part is when something comes up and there's a real emergency, or they really do need you to walk the extra mile, you're able to do it because of all the other times when you held to your boundaries and you weren't giving and giving and giving at the expense of everything else until you had nothing left to give. So that's the idea behind leading a big life. Are there any questions about that? Right. So, yeah, someone said they're out on sick leave at the moment. So, look, I think it's great if you've got it. I think it's really great to use it because, like I said, no one is going to thank you for not. Okay. So, just as we begin to wrap this up, one thing I can offer to help you with is a transferable skills assessment. So, I have an online assessment, and and what goes with that is a call with me afterwards to unpack it. So like I was saying to you, I did that on the podcast. I actually interviewed somebody after they'd done the online transferable skills assessment, and our conversation became the content of the podcast. So, which was also a very generous thing on their part for letting me do that. And I'm just going to copy I've got a little link here. I can I'll just pop into the chat if you're interested in doing that so that you can look at other options for the future. I've just got that information there in the chat. Let me see, how's it going to go? There we go. And it's also got just my email address at the bottom there. So if you want to find out a little bit more, if you need to contact me and ask me some more questions about what that might be. But basically, it's an assessment where you go in, it takes about an hour and a half, and you go through all these sort of like skills that you might have. It asks you to rate yourself. There's no false modesty required. You need to be really realistic with that because it actually will just give you this really bland, boring result unless you do it properly. So you need to kind of not sit on the fence. And once you've done that, it will give you a list of jobs that you could possibly do. And then the idea is that you go off and research the ones that that sound interesting to you. And then after that, we jump on a call together and go through it again. So it's a really like deep dive into what your skills are. And also it gives you ideas for jobs. It's an American survey. So some of the language that's used might not be familiar to people from other parts of the world, but it's pretty easy to work it out. And if we have that conversation afterwards, we can unpack what it means if it's not clear. And then I guess the next thing I want to say is don't quit without a plan. Actually create a plan for yourself so that you're not leaving in this state of duress where you're actually able to leave well. When I left, I felt like I really didn't leave well, and it was really stressful, and I didn't have a plan in place. I got my long service leave. I hired out an art studio for a while and created a bit of art, but I didn't really know what I was going to do next. And that was stressful because my husband was stressed about that because I took, obviously I was working and then I wasn't. And so he wanted to know what I was doing, and I kind of wanted to know what I was doing as well. But I just, I wish I'd had more of a clear plan in place. And I talked to some HR people and I talked to a career like counselor, but nobody really understood the skill set that I had as a teacher. No one understood the grief that I felt as I left. And they just said like, go create a portfolio career. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So, being able to have a conversation with someone who kind of gets it, it would have been great. And so that's partly why I do what I do now, because I get it. And when you start telling me, the tales of woe about what's happening in the classroom, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Whereas a lot of people from outside of education wouldn't know that. Okay. And then, it says, yeah, someone's saying, are you thinking about sidestep? Yeah, that's right. And actually, if you were interested, Liz, I could put you in touch with someone who works in that space. It could be an interesting conversation to have. So do avail yourself of that. If that's $137, it's not a huge amount of money, but it is a beginning. It's a first step, and it's a nice way, I think, if you're going to begin that process, it's a really good way to start it. And so, yeah, we've got a few minutes left before we all go off to cook dinner or whatever. Are there any questions or comments? Maybe if you take yourself off mute, if you want to ask anything about what I've said today, or if you want to ask a question about like my story or anything like that, please feel free to do that now. And I'll just play some elevator music in my head. Do, 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 do.
No, I'm just a bit burnt out with COVID this year. After I'm in early childhood and we're already behind all you teachers in pay. So to add in the disrespect has been very deflating. So
and did you say you've been in for 20 odd years? Is that right?
Yeah, like 24 years, I think, something like that now. Yeah.
Are you a director or what's your?
I'm assistant manager. Okay. I still teach and I'm working with children with disability.
Wow. So that's a
bit of everything.
Yeah. And do you have to wear masks at work at the moment?
Yeah.
Are you in Victoria?
No, I'm in Sydney.
Oh,
so
right. Okay.
we're 80%. We're a step ahead of you.
Yeah, that's right. We're
coming.
Don't think we're not jealous of that. Okay.
Oh, gosh.
So yeah, and I think you're right. Early childhood is a really tricky one because it's really hands-on. There's no respite at all. You can't leave them for a second, and the pay is much lower. So look, but the skill sets are there and the capacity is still there. And if you wanted to get out, I think you could. Yeah. And the NDIS is not a bad option if you're already working in that space because you understand probably some of it in your role. And also, from the side of the children, what they need. And so, and people have discretionary spending with that NDIS funding. So it could actually work really well. So you've got my email address there now in the chat. Why don't you just flick me an email and I'll put you in touch. And actually, Kyla Leota, who is working in that space, I also interviewed her in season 2, I think, of the podcast. And she talks about a bit about her work in that space. She's working mainly with adults, but it's the same context of, the NDIS sector. So
yeah. And that's it. I think what you enjoy, I enjoy the meetings and the planning around the children with disability. So,
right.
I think it feels like that'd be the next step.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, there's definitely some possibilities there. So we can have a chat if you like.
Thank you. Yeah.
No worries. So do we have any other questions, if anyone wants to ask before we wrap this up? Can I just ask you to put into the chat, and this for everybody, just what's your takeaway from this presentation that I've done tonight? This is really feedback for me to know what are the bits that I need to maybe flesh out a bit more, what are the bits that I should talk about less, and like what really resonates for you. So if you could just take a minute to pop into the chat, what's your takeaway from this conversation tonight? Great. So we've got needing an exit plan. Nice one. Thank you. And thinking about transferable skills. Actually, one thing I forgot to say, one of the markers for well-being, there's a couple of researchers called Ryan and Decci, and they talk about, it's the reason I like this one is because it's easy to remember. It's CAR, so competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So being able to be competent and being able to do your best in the workplace and knowing that you know what you're doing is a really great way to feel like you're that you're in a position where you're able to bring your best self to the workplace. Having autonomy, so having agency, knowing that you're in control of what happens and knowing that you're in control of the output that you give. And then relatedness, so having connections and friends in the workplace, they are markers of well-being. If you've got those three, the CAR, right, it's what drives us: competence, autonomy, relatedness. So just think about that. Do a little audit of your workplace. Do you have that in your workplace? Do you feel competent? Are you autonomous? Do you have agency over the way you spend your day and your time? Or is everything micromanaged and organized for you so that you don't have any say? And do you have good connections in the workplace with your colleagues, with your higher ups, and with the students that you're working with? And if there's something missing in any of those parts, then that means that it's impacting on your well-being. And you shouldn't be surprised by that, but it's good just to be aware of that. Good to have a plan. I have lots of skills. That's great. So look, you've all got the option there of joining me on a transferable skills assessment. Please take me up on it. I've actually cleared out some space in my diary in the next couple of weeks. The way it works is you go in, you make the payment, and then you get access to my calendar and you can book a time that suits you. So I've cleared out a bit of space in my diary for that. So take me up on the offer. Need to start planning it in the quiet. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So yeah, being really careful about the way you do it is really wise. And like I said, all those things I said to you about go see your doctor, create a process document, get all the stuff off your computer, make sure you clean out all your junk out of, get your iPod and whatever, all that stuff. Because if they decide, if you do resign and they decide to make life miserable for you, it can be really hard and really stressful. And like I cleaned out my stuff over about a 6-week period where I just took an extra bag home every night. Nobody even noticed. And I donated some stuff to the school, and I gave some to a young graduate after I'd left, and then I was done. It was great. So, and I have a relatively, you don't look at that side of my studio and just look at this nice bit here, it's really good. I've got rid of nearly all the stuff. All right. Well, look, thank you, everyone. It's been lovely to kind of meet you, and please do reach out. You've got my email address there. If you need any more support from me, that's what I'm here for. Take care, and I'll hope to see you in the near future if you want to have a chat with me.